I didn't see, it was dark, but there was no blood pooling. There was, no obvious wounds.
It's probably likely that this shooter was being mentally delayed, was just trying to impress the guy that told him, here's a gun, shoot this guy.
Obviously, he's committed murder. He has to be held accountable.
Hello and welcome to Best Case, Worst Case. This is your host, Jim Clementi, former New York City prosecutor, retired FBI profiler, and writer-producer on CBS's Criminal Minds. And with me today is my wonderful co-host.
Oh, sarcasm. I sense sarcasm. Hi, everybody. It's Francie Hakes, former state and federal prosecutor. How are you, Jim?
Francie, I don't think I could be better.
Wow, that is something.
Isn't it? Well, we're here again with one of our favorite guests and one of the most interesting people in law enforcement.
Yes.
You don't often get people who have this diverse a career while they're still in law enforcement. And
Hi, I'm Jeremy Earl.
Jeremy has had not only a distinguished career in law enforcement, but also in Hollywood. Tell us some of the titles that you've worked on.
Sure. I was on a film called The Prodigy when I was 13.
Wow.
That was a ways back. But a couple shows, Chicago Code when I was out, Empire, Chicago PD, Chicago Fire.
You're noticing a lot of Chicago there.
I hear Chicago a lot, Jim.
Could that have something to do with where you worked as a cop?
Yes, out in the south of Chicago, but right there, it's all the same. It's all the same. And pretty much I've done just about every Chicago show and every production that's come to Chicago in different cities. And that's where the passion is.
Well, what about Chicago Justice? That was the one show I was so excited because outside Law and Order, they don't have prosecutors featured very often. Jim, it's because people in Hollywood like Jim Clementi favor agents and cops over prosecutors. I don't know why.
If you recall, I'm also a former prosecutor.
Too long ago to count. Did you work on Chicago Justice?
No.
That's why they failed.
Yeah,
Jeremy
that's what I
on
said. That's what
there
I
you
said.
go, Jeremy. And so you're obviously the key to success because all these other shows that you talked about have been doing fabulously well.
That's
and
right.
Now that we're lucky enough to have you back in our studio, can you tell us about another case that you worked on?
Yes, I can.
Great. And can you tell us where in your career this case came from?
This was 2012 or 2013, around there.
Okay.
So recent.
Somewhat recent, middle of your career
recent,
or whatever. And what were you doing when this case came in?
I was working what you guys would think is the night shift, the overnight shift, but it's first shift, which is 12 a.m. to 8 a.m.
Okay. What do you call that? The morning shift?
Yeah, we just call that the first tour, tour one.
For first tour. Okay. Because the third watch is the third tour, right?
Right. Which is,
Okay.
My dad always said nothing good happens after midnight.
Really?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
When were you born, Francie? I'm just asking.
I was born in the middle of the day. Thank you, Jim.
Gotcha. Okay. There you go. I think I was born at 2 a.m.
Well, see, I think that's made my point. So, Jeremy, back to you.
So you're on the first watch.
First watch, yes.
And what were you doing? Were you on patrol?
Yeah, in that time I was on patrol and I was actually at the station because we had just come out of roll call, which is we meet at the beginning of every shift and talk about what happened on previous shifts and what to be expected on the shift you're working. And all in all, just hang out before we hit the street. And that's when the call came in.
Okay. And what did you find out in the call?
The call was an emergency call. It was shots fired and a unresponsive male lying in a drainage ditch in front of a home that separated the street from the home because there were no sidewalks.
Okay, so already shots fired, probably most dangerous situation you can go into. And there are situations where there might be a gun, where there might be shots fired, but you already know somebody is shooting here.
Yes.
So what are you thinking? What's going through your mind?
Well, anytime I'm on my way to a shots fired call or a hot call, as we would call it, funny enough, I never think of me not making it home. I never think of what if this is the last one? I never think that. I have a warrior's mentality, and that mentality is no matter what the situation, I will prevail, and I will always go home to my children. And also, in certain instances when there's shots fired and we get there, usually the gun's gone and the person holding the gun is gone. In this case, that's what happened. It was a very dark street, and it was one street light that illuminated just the intersection on the side street. And when I pulled up, I saw a tall male. He was laying in the grass, and in the home next to where the young man was lying, there was a fence and there were people there.
So I'm a little bit confused, but before we clarify that, I want to kind of back up and expand on what Jim said. One of the things that we pride ourselves on here in this podcast is taking our listeners behind police lines. I have never worn the uniform. I've never had to go to work wearing a bulletproof vest. So I don't know what it's like. And it's very difficult to imagine. But I always think to myself, if I was a police officer and I heard shots fired and I've got to get in my car and go where the shooting is or was, my heart would be pounding. My adrenaline would be pumping. I would be worried about whether or not I was going home that night. But none of that was going on with you. Are you always calm in that sort of situation?
I am, which I guess made me a great candidate for joining the SWAT team, which I did. And growing up where I grew up, shots fired, shots outside your window that wasn't new to me. The shock value of that had all but dissipated at that point in my life. And then it's just when you have, I guess for me, and I can only speak for myself, is for me, it was just more so it's almost cosmic to where I know, and it may sound hokey and kind of crazy, but I know, like, if you have that belief that I will be fine. And I know that in the roughest situations, the calmest head, the calmest heart rate, the calmest breathing is what's going to save you. Because even if you get hurt and you breathe fast and your heart races and you can't calm down, you get worse. You know, it was just something that, I mean, even back in school when I used to fist fight and get in fights, they would always be like, you're crazy, because I was always calm and quiet.
Well, so you get to this scene, it's a dark street, and I was a little confused by your description of a tall man and a man lying.
It's a tall man laying in the...
Oh, there's a tall man laying in the drainage ditch.
Yeah, he was a tall male laying in the drainage ditch face down. And there were other people behind the fence of the house that was connected to the drainage ditch.
So let me just lay this out for our listeners.
Yes.
So you have the street, you have a patch of grass that goes down into a drainage ditch, and it comes back up on the other side, and then on the other side is a fence.
Yes.
And what kind of fence is it?
It's a chain link fence.
A chain link fence, or otherwise known as a hurricane fence where I came from. And then you have a little patch of grass and then the house.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is basically behind someone's backyard.
No, it's in the front.
Yes.
It's in the street.
Oh, the front.
The grass, the ditch, the front fence, front yard, and the house.
Oh, see, I'm from the South. We don't do front fences. We have front porches. The fences are all in the back.
Well, you know, that's a little different.
It is. Friendlier.
Yeah. So you saw this guy who has been reported to be unresponsive.
Yes.
What's the first thing you do when you arrive at the scene?
The first thing I did was I went to the body and I turned him over because he was on his stomach. And I turned him over face up and check this pulse. What we do is, because just because you hear shots fired, I mean someone's shot. We roughly rub his sternum, and that will wake up anyone for the most part. And because I didn't see, it was dark, but there was no blood pooling. There was, no obvious wounds. So he was not breathing. And
so wait. So your goal at this point is rescue, not evidence.
At this point, yes. If I looked at him and I recognized him, I knew who he was from the neighborhood. And you're talking about a kid that literally didn't do anything to anyone. He walks up and down the street. He does his recreational drugs, but he doesn't bother anyone. And so I see it's him. And I started to administer CPR. But by that time, other police officers started to race and radio in. I need ambo, I need buds. That's our ambulance unit. We call them buds. Buds Ambulance Company. Okay. So, because for our town, our fire department, our city disbanded the paramedic. Well, in most South suburban towns, they disbanded their paramedic units because Buds Ambulance is this huge company. So now all the municipalities.
And that's BUDS?
BUD', Buds Ambulance. Okay. Yeah. So they, called the ambulance. The ambulance came. And at this point, once the ambulance arrived there, they are the professionals. They took over. And I go back to police mode. I go back to intelligence gathering. And I go across the fence and I speak with everyone there to get just a preliminary investigation for the detectives, which will be called to the scene. And I collected, the evidence and as far as the information. And the information was given was that a young man was being chased by another young man, shooting a gun at him. And he hit him. The now deceased gentleman fell. And the other men finished him off and pumped a few more rounds in him and then ran off into the night. So after, intelligence now, it's TOT, which is when you TOT something, it goes to the detectives.
TOT?
TOT means it means turnover to.
Two being
MID, Markham Investigative Division, the detectives, which in this case is the task force, the murder task force, which is all of the municipalities set up to have one murder task force.
Okay.
So a bunch of detectives from all over the area, just kind of like our SWAT team, which is comprised of all the top cops and a couple different municipalities make up CERT, South Suburban Rapid Response Team.
Okay.
So now at that point, I find out who it is. But I'm pulled out of it. It's their investigation. What makes this one of the hardest cases for me was when the case came up to trial, which was earlier this year, the actual trial. Watching parents relive moments is the hardest thing to witness. Because I empathize with people, and sometimes I feel people going through. Just seeing his father and his mother, you're talking about a kid that his father was in the streets, pretty tough, big bad dude back in the 70s. But to see this man so distraught over his son's death, but so forgiving of the one that pulled the trigger. It is just heartbreaking. And then once I found out through the case of the trial, the reason is the hardest because here it is. The deceased is going to meet with another boy, another guy to just hang out. And another guy shows up. They all know each other. And for some reason, the person who orchestrated it all didn't like the victim and decided to tell the other person there who was mentally delayed, gave him a gun and told him to shoot him.
Well, let's back up for a second. So at the scene, you know who it is because you recognize the victim.
The victim, yes.
Right. So you know who he is. And you're talking to the people that are gathered there.
Yeah, the ones that called. Yeah.
When you say that you gathered information, is that things like possible eyewitness identification information, people who've seen what happened?
Yeah, well, they saw what happened, but via shadowy figures because of the lighting there. So it's a credit to the homicide task force to put all those pieces together when seemingly they look like there was no pieces to put in this puzzle.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit about the investigation?
The only thing that I know for sure is that they were able to track through his cell phone because his cell phone was still there. And that's kind of what cracked the case. The victim's cell phone was still there. So his text message to the person that orchestrated his murder was there. Hey, come on, we're going to go hang out and smoke some weed. And that's how they were able to pull him into it. So, but the sad thing is he takes this other young fellow who's mentally delayed and gives him a gun and tells him to shoot our victim. And at first our victim was like, what? You know, from
He did it right in front of him?
Yeah, so the kid ends up shooting at the victim, which caused him to run. And he literally chased him down.
And so it's probably likely that this shooter was being mentally delayed, was just trying to impress the guy that told him, here's a gun, shoot this guy. He had no beef at all with the victim?
None. So they came out, and as far as the case was concerned, none. Zero. I mean, Kurt, the victim was somebody that, why would you have beef with this kid? This kid literally does nothing to no one. He's, you know.
Well, you said that then you obviously had some role in the trial, which may have been your first response on the scene. Yes. And that's where you would have seen his parents. But who was on trial? Was it the shooter himself?
The shooter was on trial.
But what happened to the guy who told him to shoot?
They said that, you know, they were in the process of trying to pull charges on him. But sometimes in the district in which I work, if it's not a slam dunk, if it's any kind of way that the prosecution could lose, they would rather take what they have and call it, opposed to running the risk of losing that part of the case in trial.
Francie, I have to ask you something. Wouldn't, in your mind as a prosecutor, wouldn't you think that having both of those people on trial at the same time would be a much better situation?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the first thing I would want to know is why didn't the police or the detectives question him and then talk to me about it, make him some sort of a deal, talk to him about being a cooperating witness? Obviously, he's committed murder. He has to be held accountable to the extent his mental state allows for that. But in a perfect situation or in even a good situation, the prosecution and the detectives should be getting his cooperation to reach the real bad guy, who's the one who ordered what is in effect a hit, Jim.
Right. Yeah. I mean, clearly, there's no question that this limited person was responsible for pulling the trigger in what sounds like a very heartless way. And I don't know if that's because he doesn't understand what he's doing or it's because he is a hardened criminal. I don't know. But the guy who told him to do it, who so flagrantly used this other person to kill this kid, I mean, he's clearly liable.
Well, it's almost like a murder for hire, but it's certainly a co-conspirator. And in Georgia, co-conspirators, parties to the crime, there's all sorts of different ways to label it. All those people are equally as responsible for the murder as if they had pulled the trigger. Yes. So that person could and should have been reached. It seems, Jim, that the lawyers for the defendant who went on trial, the actual person who pulled the trigger, should have been negotiating about this. Did you ever get any sense that that was going on?
To a degree. What the state's attorney at the time had told me, because I posed the same question. And I was like, I don't understand why don't you have to? And they said that basically the other kid in question, their stories don't match up because, of course, he's not going to incriminate himself. And his story is simple, where they all met up and then this kid, because he's quote unquote crazy, got upset, pulled out a gun and started firing. And he ran in one direction and our victim ran in the other direction.
So as commonly happens in these kinds of cases, Jim, when you have two co-defendants or two suspects who may very well be equally culpable for murder, they point their fingers at each other.
Right.
And that's a difficult situation for detectives, but also for prosecutors and for jurors, because each of them will say, I didn't do it, the other guy did it. And so then it's up to the detectives, the prosecutors, to figure out who actually did it and corroborate that.
Did the guy who ordered the hit, did he testify in the other guy's trial?
I don't think so, but I'm not sure because it was a 4-day trial and I was only on for 2 days.
Francie, for me, having both of them there is the most expedient way to deal with this and the most effective way to get justice. The fact is, if you only have the shooter there, then the shooter's defense lawyer could very effectively put together an argument that points the finger at somebody else outside that courtroom, and then they got nothing.
That's absolutely right.
How can they think that letting this guy go is the right thing to do? I mean, that really pisses me off.
No, well, I mean, he's actually the one who's the most culpable for the murder. Clearly, it was his idea. He told the developmentally delayed guy to shoot the poor victim. He did that. The victim died. He's definitely culpable of murder, Jim.
Yeah, and, I just have to say, it's really disappointing to me.
It is.
And I want to ask you, Jeremy, what do you feel about this? What do you feel about the outcome?
The outcome to me was, it's all bittersweet in this sense to me, because even though, I mean, it's a classic case of he say, she say, in the sense of where originally the shooter in his state was taking the blame until he wised up like, wait, whoa, and recanted his statement. But the sad part about it all is that watching it, you have one family that is upset because their son's passing. Then you have another family that's upset because their son is as good as passing. He's breathing, but he's being taken away. And then the craziest part of it all is then you have this one person that's like Kaiser Soze that's just walking away from it all. And that angers me to a degree. And it's because it's justice, but with the twist, but with the perversion, you know. And I understand that, and trust me, like with prosecutors and I know that's a job that I would never want to have, you know. And I applaud any prosecutor because your job, you know, like even though you know you have to process so much, and in a district where it's so busy, the 6th district is so busy, and you get what you can. That's what one prosecutor told. One ASA told me, he was like, "Well, Earl, you get what you can."
Oh, I don't like that attitude at all. I really don't. I understand it, but that is such a defeatist attitude. And as a prosecutor, you get what you can was never my attitude. My attitude was I'm going to get justice, whatever it takes, and within the bounds of the law, of course. But I don't understand something. If the shooter himself was developmentally delayed, I assume his defense attorneys use that as part of his defense. I mean, some kind of mental defense, incapacity, insanity, something. Do you know if any of those things were tried?
I don't know if any of those things were tried because it all came to me almost secondhand, if you will. Like a detective that was from my department working the case was like, "Oh yeah, you know, the shooter was, well, he said quote unquote slow, you know," and I would imagine I was like, "Oh, okay, well if he's really slow, then you know it must be some other work at play here or something," because I thought it was some kind of something, you know. But as far as really knowing, you know, did that come up? I'm not sure. Do I think it should have came up? Absolutely. I don't see how it could not come up, you know, but I can't sit here and say if it, you know, because I was only there a day and a half.
Well, you said that you knew the victim. You knew who he was from the neighborhood. Did you know either of the other two, the shooter or the hitman? I'm going to call him the hitman because really that's what he is, Jim.
Yeah, I knew the other kid as well, not the one that actually did the shooting, but the, you know, young man.
Kid who got away.
Yeah, the kid who got away. He was always in some mess. Like, oh, string of burglaries? Oh, well, let me go over here. Either he got some of the proceeds, either he knows about it, or he's just that guy. It was just one of those things where when I found out, because I didn't know at the time the whole story, I didn't find out till much later. And I was just like, it's just hard because the victim, there's no criminal record. Well, there was a trespass to a grocery store because he was sitting on a stoop, you know, but nothing like that. Nothing that would be a death warrant. You know?
Well, and that's what he got, obviously, Jim. But what about the shooter himself? Did he have any criminal history? Did you?
None.
Wow. And see, Jim, that should have been a signal, too, to the prosecutors, obviously to the detectives, that for him to abruptly shoot someone and then chase him down the street to finish the job sounds like it was out of character.
Yeah, way out of character.
And I'm sure if he had a reasonably competent defense attorney, that the defense attorney did what you said, Jim. It's the Saudi defense, right? Some other dude did it. It's a classic defense in courtrooms across the country all the time. Yep. Sometimes it works. But here, did it work? What happened? What was the verdict?
If I'm not mistaken, because I was on a plane the next day back out here to LA, but I believe it was a guilty verdict. His first statement was pleading guilty.
So he admitted to shooting the victim.
But what was uncertain was to why. Like, because imagine asking the question, like, wait, so did you guys argue? No. You have beef? No. Did you fight? No. Were you dating the same girl? No. And that's how his answers were. That's what the detective was short. No. No. And just straight faces, I'm looking at you right now. No.
So no motive. So the detectives weren't able to establish a motive until
he changed his story, I guess, like months later.
Did he really change his story or add to his story?
I guess he would be adding to his story because he still kept the same fact of, yes, he's the one that pulled the trigger, but the why.
He added later.
Yeah, the why came up.
Can you tell me how old was the victim?
The victim was 20.
And how about the shooter?
The shooter was 17.
And what was his mental capacity? Do you know?
I don't know.
But it was some kind of diminished capacity.
Yeah, some form. Because even in the courtroom, it was as if he didn't really understand the severity of the situation.
I'll tell you now that this is exactly the kind of situation that really burns me up because somebody who is clearly diminished mentally, who doesn't really understand the situation he's in, who can't afford 5 attorneys that will, do whatever they want to try to avoid justice. He gets convicted. And this guy who basically ordered the hit doesn't even get charged. Nobody even tried to bring him to justice.
Well, let me just play devil's advocate here for a minute.
Which you do
Jim.
very well, Francis.
Thank you. I'll just take that as a compliment and suggest something I've seen many times in my career as a prosecutor. You have a defendant, he confesses, and then decides because the severity of the penalty is so high that he figures, roll the dice, there's no reason to plead guilty, a bunch of different reasons, they go to trial. And it's then when they get a lawyer that all of a sudden, it's not them that did it, it's some other dude. So I'm wondering whether the reason nobody else was charged and the man who, quote unquote, ordered the hit was never charged is because detectives and prosecutors didn't credit that. Maybe they believed that for reasons they were never able to establish, the shooter was, in fact, the shooter. He killed him on his own and later blamed some other dude.
Yeah. The difference between some other dude did it and this case, though, is he specifically named the person. He named the person, said where they were, said that's where he got his gun. Those are all things that can be corroborated or refuted. And if he just said, oh, I didn't pull the trigger, somebody else did it, that's some other dude did it. But if he said, Johnny Smith told me to do it and I did it, that's very different than some other dude did it.
Well,
it's not I don't think that I've ever had a case where, especially a homicide case, where the defendant says, yes, I pulled the trigger, but I did it because this guy handed me the gun and told me to do it for no reason at all. I mean, that's not your typical some other dude did it case.
No, it's true. I mean, it is a little strange, but listen, defense attorneys, to give them the respect that they deserve, are very clever. And when they are stuck with a confession, they will find crazy rationales for that confession to try to explain them away. And saying, my guy's mentally incapacitated, which again is common to claim, whether it's true or not.
Right.
And then say, and so he didn't have the capacity to form the intent to kill. He was ordered to do it by this other guy, is a pretty clever defense, in my opinion.
Well, except that in this case, you're still going to have to prove then that defendant and that defense attorney is still going to have to prove that that guy was there and that he had access to a gun and that he would do that. So I just think the type of story that he's telling is still, he's saying, it's not that I didn't do it. It's that I did it because he told me to.
Which also doesn't, but that doesn't make a lot of sense, Jim, if you think about it. I mean, who does that? Who just kills someone because so-and-so told you to when you've got no beef with the victim, you're not fighting over a girl, you've never had any problems before, you have no criminal history.
He's 17 years old, and maybe he had the mental capacity of a 8-year-old or a 12-year-old.
But that doesn't make you a murderer.
No, exactly, because murderers have to illegally kill someone and they have to form the intent to at least do the act. And maybe he was so diminished that he couldn't form that. And I mean, think about it. How diminished would you have to be to simply say, okay, I'll shoot this guy? I mean, it's really, really bizarre. I don't know why he did it, but damn, if that other guy did tell him to do it and that guy just walked free, that stuff burns me up.
Well, that's all kinds of wrong. I agree with you. If his story is true, there is a grave injustice that has happened here, and I agree with that. But, defense attorneys who claim that a client is so mentally incapacitated that he can't form the intent to commit a crime, that is a defense to a crime. But what you're telling us, Jeremy, is that this guy was convicted. So if that defense was raised, the jury didn't buy it.
Right. And I go back to what I was saying. That kid was poor. He couldn't afford high-priced attorneys, and maybe they didn't have the money to say in that jurisdiction do a psychological evaluation or whatever it was, or have some expert come and testify. And it's just a shame because, it's just a truth that rich people get better justice.
Well, I cannot disagree with that.
Yeah. But you told us about this case, Jeremy.
Yeah.
And now I want to ask you, is this a best case or a worst case for you?
It's one of the worst cases.
Why is that?
It's one of the worst cases because there was what I would say a huge puzzle piece missing. And that's what bothers me the most, is that for me, the actual motive was never known. And what made it so bad for me was that when I saw the father
of the victim,
when I saw him in the first day of the trial, and they have to sit here and relive this moment and look at these pictures. Can you imagine that? And I know of him from the streets. He was not a nice dude.
The father?
The father. But for him to have the compassion to tell the shooter, I forgive you, I was just taken back. Like, wow.
Yeah, I'm constantly amazed by the strength of certain victim families, surviving victim families, their ability to forgive, and even in the most horrific crimes.
Yeah.
But I do understand it. And I do understand it as something that they actually release themselves from carrying that around forever by forgiving that person. And, some people believe they put it in God's hands at that point. And maybe that's true. The fact is, it's just horrible what happens to some people. It's horrible what some people do to other people. And unfortunately, that's what makes it necessary for us to have the justice system that we have.
Yes.
That's right. This sounds like a truly, tragically senseless crime.
Yeah. Well, Jeremy, we really appreciate you coming and telling us about this. And I can tell just by your demeanor that it still bothers you. And I appreciate the work that you did. And I'm sure Francie does as well.
I do thank you for your service as a police officer, which you continue to serve.
Yes. And thank you for coming on Best Case, Worst Case. For now, we'll wrap up this episode. And until next time, thank you for listening.
Best Case, Worst Case is an XG production. Produced by Jim Clementi at Empire Studios, LA. Engineered and edited by Mike Thal. Music composed and performed by Simba Sumba. And hosted by Wonder.
You can listen to Best Case, Worst Case on your favorite listening app. We are on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen to podcasts.
If you want to do something about child sexual abuse, Darkness to Light can help. Did you know that more than 90% of the time children are sexually abused by someone they know?
Jim, this isn't about stranger danger. It's about learning the true risks. Darkness to Light's training can help prevent, recognize, and react to child sexual abuse in your community.
When you make the decision to get involved, kids can be protected. It starts with you.
Visit www.d2l.org to take the training and learn more.
That's D2L.org.